Hello, fourth graders. Today we're going to continue talking about measurement. Last week and the week before, we were looking at how to measure the shortest distance around the outside edge of a shape. We were finding the perimeter. This week and going into next week, we're going to be looking at the inside of those figures. I want you to check out the shapes that I have displayed in front of you, the pink, the turquoise, and the purple shapes. And I want you to ask yourself, how much space do these shapes take up? And which one takes up more space? Now, in order to make that decision, I can look at them and make a guess, but to really make a smart mathematical decision, I would need to figure out a way to measure it. Okay, and I'm actually going to be measuring the inside of these figures and not the outside. I want to see how much space they take up. So grabbing a ruler isn't really going to help me. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and see, okay, how can I fill up these shapes? How many of these little squares, and I've just created these squares, I'm going to call them units, square units, and how many of these square units would it take to fill up each of these shapes? So right now, I'm going to go ahead and fill up, I've got that pink rectangle, okay, is taking 6 of these square units. And that purple long rectangle, what would you estimate? I'm going to guess it's going to be about 5. So that's going to be a measurement of about 5 square units. And then lastly, this is my somewhat composite figure made up of rectangles. This looks like it might end up being about maybe another 5 or 6. It's going to be close here. So by creating a unit of measurement, measuring them all with the same unit, in this case, square units, they're shaped like squares, and each edge, so each edge is going to be exactly the same length and measurement, I can now make a comparison, and I can say that this pink rectangle up on top takes up the most space, and I know that because it actually has a measurement of 6 square units. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and label that as 6 square units. And in order to write square units, there's a couple different ways I could write it. I could write units squared, the word squared, or I could say square units. And then sometimes you will also see, instead of the word square or squared, you may also see a little 2 right above the unit, like that. That means squared. Okay, so we have a measurement of 6 units squared or square units. Our purple rectangle has a measurement of approximately 5 square units. I'm going to go ahead and do units, and I'll put the little 2 to show squared. And then our composite figure up here was also another 5 square units. So now, because I've established a system of measurement, I can actually do that comparison of how much surface area these shapes take up, how much space they take up. So that pink rectangle is going to take up the most amount of space. Now, when we go ahead and look at some other figures, we can consider, area is going to be the amount of space a figure covers or the measurement of the space inside of a figure. So we're finding the area of a shape. And I really want you to picture in your head the tiles on a floor. Imagine our classroom floor and the tiles that make up our floor. Those tiles are a way of measuring the area of the floor of the classroom. So if I'm looking straight down on this purple figure here, I can actually count up the number of square units are colored in purple. And if I count up the squares, that will give me the area measurement for that figure. So in this case, okay, here's a group of 8. Here's another group of 8. There's another group of 8 right there. So I have 3 groups of 8. That would be 24 square units. All right. And if you don't have already a grid in the background, okay, you can sort of imagine, I want you to imagine that you take whatever shape it is that you're working with, and I have a little orange rectangle on the right. Take whatever shape it is that you are working with and imagine that you're placing it right on top of graph paper, okay? And you can kind of see the lines right in the middle of it that break it apart into those square units. And those lines I can really envision as being rows and columns. So if I broke this up, this rectangle, okay, into its units, I'm going to have, okay, 4 columns and 2 rows. Okay, so now I'm actually seeing what is behind what the grid that's behind it. So if I have, let's see, 4 going along the top. So here's my 4 columns right there. And I have 2 rows on my width. Okay, if I count them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I now have a measurement of an area of 8 units. I'll just put UN squared. Okay, squared because we measure it on the inside with square units. So if you are presented with a figure that you have to find the area for, and you've already got a grid in the background where you can see the squares, you can simply count up the squares in order to figure out how many are there. Or you can look at the number of columns and rows. If I have 4 columns, okay, 2 rows, okay, I'm taking that 4 2 times, that's going to give me 8 square units. So here's a rectangle that I have, all right? And I could use that little trick of imagining the grid in the background. So here's a little grid right on top of my rectangle here, okay? And this grid is creating centimeters, okay, square centimeters. So I have labeled up on top, I have 10 columns. So this 10 centimeters would be my length. This is the longest part, okay, the longest side. So I have 10 columns and I have a width of 8 centimeters. Okay, that measurement's telling me also I've got, if I'm imagining these square centimeter units, I've got 8 rows. Okay, I can go through and I can count up the units if I wanted to do some repeated addition. So I could say I could count up 10 8 times. So here's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So I could do repeated addition there, or I could count 8. I've got these columns of 8 in each column. So I could count 8 plus another 8 plus another 8 plus another 8, 10 times. Or the easier thing to do would be to multiply. Instead of saying 10 8 times, I can just say 10 times 8, or I can flip it around. I know with multiplication, the order doesn't matter. I can also say 8 times 10, and I will still end up with the same answer. I'm still going to end up with a total of 80, whether I counted them by hand, each individual unit, or if I multiplied or did repeated addition, I would still get an area of 80. Now, in this case, that area is 80 centimeters, but it's not just plain centimeters. It's centimeters squared, or centimeters squared. Because I'm measuring the inside of that figure, I'm measuring the amount of space that that figure is taking up. And we measure the inside with squares. Okay, let's check out another one. So keeping in mind now that an easier trick, instead of just counting all those little units, easier trick is to go ahead and multiply. So if I check out this rectangle here, okay, I can think multiplication. I can find my area by multiplying the length times the width. Okay, so if I multiply length, and in this case, here is my length. Okay, my longest side is my length, 15 yards, and my width is 3 yards. So A for area, equals is made by multiplying length, 15 yards, times or by the width, which is 3 yards. So over to the side, stack up your 15 and your 3, multiply 15 times 3, okay, and 15 times 3 will give you a final area of that rectangle. The area of that rectangle then ends up being 45. Now again, units are super important. When we're measuring area, we are measuring square units. So this would be yards, okay, yards, I'll put a D on the end, yards squared with that little 2 that shows it squared, or you would see square yards. In order to find the area, you multiply length times width, and you mark the units as squared. All right, so let's actually look at a square. We've been working with rectangles. Let's look at a square right now. Okay, so this square has a length of 9 feet. What is the area of this square? Okay, so we know that there's a length of 9 feet. We know that it is a square. That's important. And we have to find the area of that square. Okay, so here's one length. What's something that we know about squares? Well, notice I've already marked on here the little tick marks on each side. I know a square has 4 sides that are equal in length. Why is that important? Well, that means each of these sides, I can go on in and label each side as 9 feet, 9 feet, 9 feet. What is our formula for finding area? Well, A, area, equals, area is made by multiplying the length times the width, okay? So in order to find the area of the square, the length of the square, we already know we're given that it is 9 feet times the width. Whoa, what's the width though? The width is also 9 feet. Remember, length and width on a square are going to be exactly the same. So we multiply 9 by itself, 9 times 9. We're going to end up with an area of 9 times 9 is 81. 81 what's? 81 square feet. Okay, don't get tricked when you actually are finding the area of a square. You need to remember that you're actually multiplying that number by itself. I tend to see a lot of kids when they have to find the area of a square, they will multiply the length times 4 because it's got 4 sides, and that's not finding the area, that's finding perimeter. Length times width equals area. 9 times 9. Let's do one more together, and then I think you'll be ready to try some all by yourself. Last problem that we'll look at. A rectangular picture frame has a length of 11 inches and a width of 8 inches. Okay, rectangular, important. All right, we want to make sure that we remember properties of a rectangle. Okay, opposite sides are going to be the same length. A length of 11 inches, so I'll go ahead and label 11 inches on one side, and a width of 8 inches. Okay, width of 8 inches, so I'll put the 8 up on top, that shorter side. What is the area of the frame? So we have to find the area. So we're finding area. What is that formula for area? Length times width. Okay, I'm going to go in, I'm going to replace those variables, those letters L and W with what I know. I know the length is 11. I know the width of this rectangle is 8. 11 multiplied by 8 is what? And I hope you found an area of 88. And what would my units be? Square inches. So you could either say square inches, you could say inches squared, or you could say inches with that little 2 hanging above the top of it. Okay, square inches. That way we know we've measured the inside of the figure. All right, great job. Try out the exit ticket after you are done with this, and good luck, my friends. Thank you very much and have a great day.